Welcome to the Clapperboard podcast. I am the Thought Theater, and today on the show we have Southpaw and Evan Monroe. Two very talented video essayists and film critics. You will absolutely love their stuff if you like mine, so I'll leave their socials and how to connect with them in the episode description. This is bound to be a good one, so let's hop right into it. Okay, hopping right in. If you guys want to just kind of introduce yourselves and how you got started in YouTube, starting with Southpaw, go ahead.
Well, it's kind of funny. I used to run a YouTube channel for the Uncharted 3 multiplayer community, which is like about as obscure as it gets. And I stopped doing that in early 2013. And I have like 500 subscribers from my days of like doing videos about Uncharted 3. And I stopped doing it just because like I wasn't particularly interested in doing that anymore. And I really had no plans on getting involved in YouTube again. And then there was this, it's kind of a funny story. First, there's like The Last Jedi that comes out, right? And it was like one of the most miserable viewing experiences I ever had in the theater.
Oh no.
And I was so confused. It was like the first Star Wars movie that I went and saw at midnight. And I was very pissed because I was excited for it. I liked The Force Awakens. I was one of those people that was tricked into thinking that The Force Awakens was a good revival of Star Wars. It's not, by the way. And yeah, and it's like, so Rian Johnson, I had an all right impression of. I didn't think Looper was a bad movie when I first saw it. And he directed the better episodes of Breaking Bad, a couple of them at least.
I didn't even know he directed any of Breaking Bad.
He directed Ozymandias, dude.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so I was excited for it. And it's like, okay, Luke is here finally, hopefully, considering that Carrie Fisher has passed away and they've already killed off Han Solo, maybe they'll leave Luke Skywalker alive, at least for the third movie, right? And I mean, yeah, that's kind of a foregone conclusion now. So I was very confused and angry, and there were a lot of things that weren't making sense to me. And then I found Mahler's video. A friend of mine from my Uncharted 3 days sent me a link to his video because he was likewise outraged, as pretty much everyone else that I knew was. And I thought it was really funny, so I subscribed. And I was following EFAP for like since its beginning. And then there was a video that came out in like February of last year saying that Mission Impossible Fallout is a bad movie. And the funny thing is that was the movie that was like, it was my favorite movie of 2018. And it was an unexpected favorite too. I went and saw that movie 6 times in the theater, and Legend. I have never done that for a movie before. Yeah. And so the cool thing was like, I saw it the first time, really enjoyed it. And then saw it a couple more times after that, and like the more and more I watch, it's like this whole story actually makes a lot of sense when you really try to analyze it and think, well, does this aspect of it make sense? Does it make sense that they can account for all of these different contingency plans and everything? And it does, actually. And so this video saying it's a bad movie, it's badly written, I was like, okay, I'm not agreeing with this, but I'm open to being proven wrong. And it was such a terrible video. It got so many like plot details wrong. And so I was like working on a scripted response to it when I get a notification from Mahler's channel that he and his buddies are watching that very video. And so I had already have like a whole script ready. And I was in the middle of editing it, I think, when I was watching his stream, and I'm like, actually pointing out a ton of stuff that Mahler and his friends were not that Mahler and his friends were not getting right about the movie, or they were just missing certain key pieces of information that disproved this guy's video. And they decided that they wanted to have me come on and talk to the guy that made the video. And so I appeared on EFAP in episode 28, made a good impression with everyone, I guess. And then I just started making YouTube videos irregularly. You know, I want to make long form content, and making long form content and really trying to very thoroughly break down why a film is bad. It takes a long time, especially for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
I have a full-time job too. Like, YouTube is not my job. I'm a small fry. I have like less than 2,500 subscribers, and so it's not something I can like fully rely on to do full time. I would like to do it full time eventually though, but in the meantime, I dedicate 40 hours a week to, you know, working at a grocery store. And so that's basically how I got my start. And then, you know, I started podcasting as a means of like making up for the fact that I can't like do scripted videos all that often. And basically doing the EFAP formula. And that's actually how I came across Evan. Evan left a comment on one of my videos discussing a certain thing that the YouTuber Brown Table said about The Dark Knight Rises. The Dark Knight Rises is a terrible movie, and Brown Table made a video defending it and said that the plot holes in The Dark Knight Rises don't actually have any effect on the plot in any way. And that kind of caused me to like snap. and like, because that's one of the movies that I actually want to do a critique of. Like, it was going to be The Dark Knight Rises, and then I saw Toy Story 4. Like, okay, well, I'm going to work on Toy Story 4 first, because I hate that movie even more. And then The Last of Us Part 2 came out. I'm like, fuck, I have to work on Last of Us Part 2 now. But like, I've been arguing with people for years about The Dark Knight Rises actually being a terrible movie, and then just hearing them say, oh yeah, well, the plot holes don't actually affect the plot all that much, caused me to lose my mind. And I think I clipped the segment in EFAP where we were covering that, and I just start raging over how stupid that line was. And Evan left a comment down below the clip, and he said that he made a video that was in response to that very line from Brown Table. So I checked that out, and I checked out this other video of his called "Art Is Not Subjective," which it's kind of funny. I don't agree with that thesis anymore, but at the time I liked it enough. I brought him on. I actually showcased about half of his video, and then like directed people to come check out the rest of his video. Sent it to Mahler. Mahler then featured that on EFAP, and Evan guested, I think, on the 3rd episode of my podcast, and then became a co-host afterwards.
That is awesome.
So, yeah,
that's quite the origin story there.
Very long origin story. I know. I'm trying to like get it as concise as possible, but there's quite a bit of lore.
So yeah, quick question. So you do agree with the thesis that art is subjective then?
So there are objective elements to art, but objective quality is not a thing.
Okay, I would agree with that, but I think that's a very interesting discussion for another day. Now, yes. Evan, I want to hear your origin story.
Sure. I've been watching YouTube for quite a while. Like that's been something that I kind of grew up with, and I was always interested in the concept of video essays. I began like to watch different channels, and particularly with in relation to film criticism, and I actually started doing written reviews that on a website that I made, and they weren't getting much traction, and I wasn't really invested in them. I just saw a lot of movies, and I would review a lot of movies, but there wasn't much to it. And then after that, I made a YouTube channel that I've since stopped uploading to, and that one I made videos regularly, and it was the same thing as my website, where it's just I wasn't pouring any passion into it, and it was just videos that I made out of obligation to make, like on a weekly basis or like every 2 weeks, to try to like basically gain more subscribers if I could. And it was just something I wasn't interested in. And then finally there was one day where I made a video about whataboutisms, and I put that on my personal channel, just the one that I didn't upload to. I just made it for fun basically, and it was just something that I was like, it didn't mix with my other channel that I was making video essays to. So I was just like, you know what, I'll just put it here and I'll just make it for fun. And that actually got a decent bit of views, and I really liked how that video turned out. I was like, you know what, this video is kind of what I want to make videos in the style of, essentially. And then over time, I started uploading more videos to that channel, and they were semi-responses to people. They were kind of, my style is kind of to tear down argumentation and to use films as the basis of my argumentation. So that video was talking about whataboutisms that different people have used to defend The Last Jedi. And then, as Southpaw mentioned, I made that video about plot holes that was in response to Brown Table's line, some with Patrick Willems, but it was just like, people had been disregarding plot holes for so long, and I was just like, dude, I need to address this and talk about why I think they matter. And then I made the video about objectivity in art, which to a degree I still agree with, but like you said, that's kind of an argument for a different day. And ever since then, I've just been uploading to that channel, and that's kind of been what I've stuck by. I'm like, I want to make videos just for fun rather than just to make them for the sake of making them. And it's like, I think that that's kind of important when it comes to YouTube, and I think that that's kind of missing often nowadays for the most part. And that's why I respect channels that I think pour a lot of passion into their videos and their work. So Southpaw told a little bit of my origin, which is like how I met him basically, and that helped me out. So after he helped with my channel by featuring part of my video on his podcast, and then obviously I hosted after that, he sent it to Mahler, and it got featured on EFAP in full actually. So that really helped to boost my channel.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude.
I think it was like the first video that EFAP covered that was like 100% positive. Like, we endorse this video. Come check this guy out.
Yeah, it was like there were just a couple of instances where they paused, like mostly for copyright or just to like talk about a couple of things. But it was like, for the most part, they were just watching it. So it was a fun experience. It was a great night watching that, and then just seeing everyone's reactions and just basically being told, like, go support this guy. It was an awesome experience to behold. And ever since then, I've appeared on EFAP a couple of times, particularly with Southpaw, and once by myself with a Critical Drinker as well to cover a Cinema Wins video. But yeah, I also have a relatively small fan base right now, but I'm growing steadily, and I'm hoping to keep going. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny kind of how all of our individual YouTube stories converge through EFAP. It seems to be the catalyst by which everything collides in this sphere.
Yeah, I mean, really, EFAP has done a lot to help me get recognition that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, I feel, or at least it would have taken a lot more time to do. It's been a really helpful podcast community, with I don't know, just raising awareness of who certain people are. And I think that in general, even if I don't agree with the concept of like objective quality, objectively good, objectively bad, I at least agree with their standard for what makes a story well written or poorly written. And I also think, like, for certain, okay, so you can't say that like Mission Impossible Fallout sexualizes children the same way that Cuties does, like that's a thing that someone could say, but the problem is that's like objectively an invalid interpretation because there isn't a single shot in the movie where there's a kid. So it's like, yeah. So that's the kind of thing where there's objective elements. Yes, there's facts. There are things that are just universal. But when it comes to interpretations, when it comes to assigning quality, that's always going to require a subject, a person to like perceive what's like the media, and then to form an assessment of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I guess another element of that, and a question for you, would be, most people, and I would say personally, believe that good artistic camera work is a factor in what makes a movie good. But then you have something like Following from Chris Nolan, which is black and white shaky cam, which is stylistic, or even Blair Witch. At that point, when you start having a discussion about the objective and subjective qualities of what makes a good film, how would you approach that?
Well, I mean, what are they trying to do with the film specifically? Because I think that The Lighthouse has great camera work, but I don't think that the type of cinematography that they're doing in that movie should be done for everything.
Right.
I don't think it should be like standardized into basically a convention.
Gotcha. And do you have any thoughts on that, Evan?
What do you mean on like the camera work example that you used?
So in the I guess the point I was trying to make with that is, like, if I believe that camera work isn't important to a good movie and you believe that it is, whose standards do you go off of by objectively criticizing a film?
my stance on that would typically just be like it depends on what a film is trying to achieve and like how like camera work and cinematography like I think that they play a critical part inside of a storytelling format, and it's just a matter of like how things are portrayed inside of the film. Like Southpaw said, The Lighthouse has a very narrow aspect ratio and it's in black and white and there's a lot of steady cam, and it's like that might not work very well for a film like Mission Impossible Fallout, for instance, which is an action movie, because like you kind of need a sense of scale inside of that film, and it might not work if it's all enclosed. It's like aspect ratios are something that different filmmakers make different use of. Some go for wide, some go for narrow. It's just a matter of what a film is trying to achieve, and I think like what you could assign as quality to different like cinematography in terms of shaky cam versus steady cam just depends on like what type of genre a film is and what like is trying to be achieved by the filmmakers. That's what I'd say.
Awesome.
Well, I also think that, I also think that like leniency should be given to movies where it's like maybe the exact kind of cinematography hasn't been discovered yet. So like you look at a science fiction movie in the 50s, right? Take The Day That the Earth Stood Still, right? The Day the Earth Stood Still. That probably would look amazing. I'm not talking about the 2008 remake. Okay, I'm talking about the original. Okay. Like you could get to like look really amazing, right? If you had, let's say, Denis Villeneuve. That's how you pronounce his last name, right?
I have no clue, dude.
Villeneuve.
It's different every time for me.
Evan, help me.
It's Denis Villeneuve.
Denis Villeneuve. Okay. I was close. The second time. Denis Villeneuve. Right. So have Denis Villeneuve do a remake of the Day the Earth Stood Still. I mean, given what I've seen of his movies, I would imagine that he would make a good remake, and he would get it looking like he would have better cinematography than the original. However, I don't think that the original having the standard kind of cinematography for its time is necessarily something to judge it against. You know, it's like, well, this is an early movie. It's an old film. They haven't really been able to pioneer a whole lot of like techniques with getting the camera to move in a dynamic way that really grabs your attention.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and I guess in that way we all agree that the importance of cinematography, or basically anything in a story, is based off of the person who's making the film's goal and whether or not that was accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right. So the subject of today's podcast, the big one, is Tenet, which is a film that I think all of us have seen multiple times.
I've seen it twice.
And I've seen it once.
And I have seen it 5 times, shamelessly.
5 times?
I have,
wow.
Yes. It was one of those films where my first viewing, I didn't know how I felt about it. And that's the first time I've seen basically any Nolan film is... I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, but after seeing it twice, Southpaw, what would you, out of 10, what would you rate it?
I think I can't go any higher than a 6 out of 10.
Okay. And Evan, you?
I'm pretty low. In all honesty, I need to read into the film more and probably talk about it with other people, but I do not think it's very well made at all. Like I would put it in the realm of a 3 or a 4 personally.
That is astonishingly low, honestly.
It could be that low for me. I'm just saying, like, the highest I'm willing to put it is a 6.
Is a 6? Okay. So what would you say are its strongest and weakest elements?
Strongest, I would probably say, is the direction, obviously, and like some of the sets and the effects look amazing. That's the case with pretty much any Nolan movie. Like even a film like Interstellar that I have a lot of problems with, and I think that the screenplay isn't very well written, like that film still looks amazing, and you can be sure when you go into a Christopher Nolan movie that it's going to look incredible and he's going to direct the hell out of it. So I'd say that that's probably the strongest element of the film. I'd say the weaker is probably the character work. Like a lot of people cite that for Nolan films, that like he's not particularly great at doing character work for the most part. And at the same time, I also say the script is lacking in a lot of places, like how events are portrayed and how the film uses the concept of inversion. I don't think a lot of it lines up very well, but it's just those are probably what I would go to. I'd go to character work and story as being the weaknesses of the film.
Yeah, as far as weaknesses go, character work and story is usually not what you want to be told.
Yeah, unfortunately, and it's like I swear Christopher Nolan did a great job with that in his early days, and this is something that I've thought recently. I feel like to a degree the money has gotten to his head. Like I feel like in the early days he made small movies because he didn't have very big of a budget, and it's just that in recent years I think he's had so much money that he can do pretty much anything he wants with like his worlds, and I feel like they almost get a little too big for his own good because like it just sometimes gets a little bit out of hand with the concepts he's trying to deal with, because when you give him the right budget, the right production, then he can make a fantastic concept which is relatively small work well. But I think he still needs to work on making a big concept work well, because sometimes it just gets a little out of hand for him.
So you'd say that Nolan, around at least between the last 3 films, has become more of a style over substance director?
I think that that's probably fair, and as unfortunate as it is, I'd probably say that.
Yeah, that's
It's
fair.
sad too. It's sad too because the Matrix has proven that you can do a high concept film that explores a lot of like interesting concepts about just existence really, and still deliver compelling action, great cinematography, and memorable characters. And I don't think that Nolan is able to do all of those things.
So, like, I guess in your view, you would say that he has the potential to do those things, but he gets caught up in his own kind of world building that he forgets the world itself?
I'd certainly say that the world building in Inception would probably be, well, I'm not even sure if I'd say it's Inception's strongest suit. It's been a while since I've seen Inception, and I didn't really care for that movie. And a part of the reason why I didn't care for that movie, well, a big part of the reason is because every character besides Cobb is so flat and forgettable. And Cobb's character development, if I'm remembering correctly, isn't even it's not groundbreaking, but at least it's there. Like there's character development for Cobb, and he's really the only character to kind of latch onto and root for, care about, invest in at all, and none of the other characters are. And so when you have a story where I don't care about what happens to the people in the story, it's going to greatly affect my experience. Yeah, and I understand that that's not going to be the case for everyone. I understand that they might prioritize visuals. They might say that, no, it's more important for there to be good action sequences or great visuals, great cinematography, great music, blah, blah, blah. But I just feel like I'm left without very much substance.
And yeah. And I guess as far as like Nolan goes in general as a director, as his films have progressed, he's sort of lost that ground that he had when he was sort of pigeonholed into small stories before he gained the budget that he did. And I guess I'm sure Southpaw, you'd make the argument that started happening with The Dark Knight, where no, not The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, where he just it was basically a massive war film that was trying to balance too much at once, and you'd say it would collapse under its own weight.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that Inception was when the cracks really began to show. Even if, like, overall Inception was well received. Okay, I'm willing to concede that my take on Inception is not going to be very popular. But I would say, like, just it showed his weaknesses when it came to developing characters, and then The Dark Knight Rises came out, and there is character development in The Dark Knight Rises. It's just very weak character development. It's not particularly well written, and it's especially sabotaged by an absolutely nonsensical garbage plot where there isn't like a single scene. There isn't a single scene that's taking place that doesn't have problems, pretty much, which I think that Evan can attest to because he recently rewatched that movie like a few months ago and he took notes.
Yeah, seriously, man. Like every scene has something significant to it, like fundamentally broken in terms of just like what the hell is going on in this scene. It's like it's fascinating to watch, honestly, and it's like it's something that's interesting to take note of. But I'm just when I saw it, I'm just like, this isn't really a case of different elements of the script aren't making sense. It's just like the basic plot fails like consistently throughout the entire narrative, and it's unfortunate to watch because you're like, Nolan for the most part had a reputation of being very detail driven, and it's just like in that movie, I don't know what it was, but the details just completely slipped through the cracks.
I feel like
go ahead.
I feel like The Dark Knight is also one of those movies where it's really more plot focused than character focused, but there's still enough character work in there that I do care about, like the people in the movie. But certainly his strongest character work was in it was like, okay, so Batman Begins had pretty strong character work as far as I remember. The Prestige had very strong character work, and I don't know about Memento because I haven't seen Memento. So like
Gasp.
bear with me.
Same here. Own the Blu-ray, still haven't seen it.
No, as far as like Nolan showing, okay, so I guess the way I describe Memento is if you stripped the inversion concept of Tenet into an emotional arc and it's 100% character focused, that's what Memento is. I'd say it is probably one of his strongest, if not his strongest films outside of The Prestige. But here's kind of an interesting take on my end is that I think The Prestige is his strongest film, but it's not my favorite of his because I see Nolan as the experienced film director, not necessarily the character film director. So when I go into one of his films, I guess the subjective, objective qualities that I judge it by are more experience based than character driven, and maybe that's dumb in like just broad film criticism terms. But as far as that goes, and like his first film that really started showing his experience touch being Inception. I heard your thoughts on Inception, Southpaw, but Evan, what's your take on Inception?
I'm mixed on it. I've watched it a lot. Like I've seen that movie something like 8 to 10 times over the course of my life since I've seen it. And for me, I find it a very entertaining movie, and kind of like how you described it, it's very much kind of about the experience of seeing it, especially with how the dreams are staged. But I actually watched it with a friend recently, and he pointed out a lot of stuff that he thought was very flawed about the movie. And ever since then, I've seen some of its faults, especially with like how the rules are put together, the dreams. There's some stuff which doesn't quite add up, and as Southpaw mentioned, most of the characters are pretty much blank slates. Like just you know enough about them to basically know their role inside of the story, and that's about it. It's like you get a few characters who are interesting, but I find that movie very entertaining. But it's one of those instances where I feel it's more entertaining than it is like narratively powerful or like really well put together. I'd cite that as a film that I like more subjectively than I do in terms of like how the merit of its filmmaking is.
Yeah.
And I would say...
No, you're good.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, in relation to that, I'd say, well, Inception is probably my favorite film of all time, and I've put a lot of time into trying to deconstruct it. And I think a lot of the things that people say might be plot holes, like the way dreams are structured, for example, like you have to die to exit a dream, but at the very end, they only die once and they jump 3 levels up out of a dream. Some people see that as a plot hole. I actually see that as like an Easter egg as to whether Maul was correct as if he was still dreaming or not. So I guess in that sense, it might just be a matter of like, are we hyper analyzing his films to the point where we're seeing things that aren't actually there? Or do you think that there is a lot more fault in Nolan's writing than we might give him credit for sometimes?
Well, I've stopped going to Nolan movies expecting like much character work, especially after Dunkirk. I was shocked at how disappointed I was in when I saw Dunkirk. I had heard so many good things about it, and like from a technical level, yes, it's very competent. It's certainly a lot better than The Dark Knight Rises. But I couldn't care about the characters, and that's a very subjective thing, right? Like you could care about the characters in Dunkirk, you could care about the people in Dunkirk, and of course, I mean, I don't want the Nazis to obliterate the British forces, but there's no individuals that I can really latch onto and care for, which is something that the movie 1917 gave me.
Oh yeah,
and 1917 was a masterpiece. Yeah,
it's an incredible movie.
I cared very much for Blake and Schofield throughout that movie, and I guess if I can spoil 1917 here for a bit,
yeah, go ahead.
Go watch 1917 if you haven't. Blake's death in like the halfway point of the movie, very, very emotional, like very sad. Hits me a lot harder than most movie deaths do, and it's one of those like subversions of expectations that I feel works really well. Like you think that Blake is the protagonist, you just assume so because he's the one with like a vested interest in seeing the mission through, and then it's not. No, this is Schofield's story, and it works just as well, especially like on further rewatches, where you realize no, this is like a hero's journey, where Schofield is the hero,
Oh yeah.
And I found that to be a much better experience than Dunkirk, even though I'm sure that what Dunkirk was going for, like it's fine, but I do prefer character work, and that's a preference thing, and it might not be fair to necessarily judge Nolan films based on their character work, but if the character work is weak, it's going to be very hard for me to like actually give a shit. So, with Tenet, the only character that I like, okay, so I kind of felt something for Kat. Like I felt bad for her situation, but like the only character besides her that I really felt anything about was Neil. I thought that Neil was a good character. I thought that he was interesting enough. But like Sator, not really. Especially his motivation to like destroy the world and everything.
I loved the hell out of Kenneth Branagh's performance, though. That's one thing I'll give credit to for his character is, man, he had a performance that was blowing it out of the water. Like,
true.
Kenneth Branagh gave us all.
For being the character that he was, as silly as maybe his motivation was, and maybe that's something that can be deconstructed further, I think even on the scenes where he maybe had really cheesy lines, like when they were in the hotel room and where he's like, if I can't have you, no one can. If anybody else tried that line, I might have started laughing, but he just carried a fury to him that he kept up the entire film that was like, it gave that emotional connection at least to him, even if the plot in that element was less strong.
Oh yeah,
sure.
Like that's exactly it. Like there were a couple of lines. Like I watched it with my younger brother, and he was laughing at a couple of instances with lines and in a few moments. But I swear, like there were some moments that we were just like, dude, this is Kenneth Branagh. Like he's making this work. This is pretty cheesy, but at the same time, his performance, he's selling this 100%.
Yeah, his performance is fine. It's just the character behind it. I mean, Kenneth Branagh is basically carrying his character.
Yeah.
He doesn't have very strong material, but he's doing a lot of good stuff with it. I just found that like character wise, probably like I sympathize with Kat, but I don't think she's necessarily a compelling character. I found Neil to be an interesting character. I didn't find the protagonist to be an interesting character, and I'm gonna just call the protagonist John, by the way, because that's less of a mouthful.
Did you by the way watch my video essay on Tenet?
You know what? I have not seen that yet.
Okay, so the funny thing is like the first thing I say in that essay is I'm just gonna refer to him as John, like almost verbatim. So
yeah, it's so much easier because that's the actor's name. Like the John, he doesn't seem to have a whole lot of personality. It pops up very occasionally, but his motivations, his character traits, they're not very clearly defined. And I get that this is not what the movie is necessarily going for here. But just because it's not what you're going for, it doesn't mean that I'm suddenly going to just like no longer have that thought in the back of my head where it's like, man, I just don't give a shit about this guy. The one time in the movie where I thought, like, okay, this is a pretty fun character to watch is the kitchen fight. Which
I love that fight, dude.
That was great stuff.
I gotta say, the action in this movie is some of Nolan's best action. Because especially with the Batman movies, it's ranging from shaky cam, incomprehensible, you can't see what's going on, and then it evolves to, okay, the camera is more still and the shots are wider and you get a better sense of what's going on. But if you are really paying attention to the choreography, they're not actually fighting as if they are trying to kill each other or knock each other out.
Oh yeah,
Dude,
it's very
that
jerky.
headbutt in The Dark Knight Rises, it's like they're 4 feet away. Like it's like, what the hell?
Yeah,
it blows my mind that made it into the final cut.
That was really driving me crazy my first time watching that movie, and I knew that there were other things I was catching. And it's like there's multiple instances of extras just falling over, reacting as if they got punched or shot, but there's no punch or bullet hitting them. And there was also driving me crazy that there were so many moments in the film where a gun would be shot and there would be neither a muzzle flash or a casing ejection. It's the very first gunshot in the movie when CIA shoots the bullet next to the dude's head. It's like the slide is not racking back, which is what a gun objectively does to eject a casing. So it just looks fake. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, you dubbed a gunshot sound in there, but you didn't fire a blank or anything. And that really just, it's a nitpick. I understand. It doesn't actually, that's something that actually doesn't have an effect on the plot. Okay. But
it affects your experience.
It's really, yeah, if I'm supposed to suspend my disbelief and I'm seeing stuff like this, it's just silly. It's really elementary stuff that's being fucked up here. And so, but the action in TENET, on the other hand, is really good. It's shot very well. It feels very intense. Especially all the stuff that they do with the inverted physics.
Yeah.
How they filmed this is just mind blowing to me. And my favorite scene in the film by far, or favorite two scenes rather, is when John is fighting himself. And it's
oh, that was so cool.
The first time it happens, it really blows blows you away with how he's doing these inverted backflips and shit. And you're like, whoa, and then you see it happen from future John's perspective later on in the film, and now past John is inverted, and or at least from future John's perspective, and it's a cool looking fight no matter which way you're watching it. And so that has to be my favorite part of it. And there wasn't anything in the choreography that really bothered me, at least, but maybe if I were to rewatch it slow down, maybe I could spot some stuff that isn't holding up as well. But I will say it's not as glaringly obvious that the fighting is fake as it was in The Dark Knight Rises, or the throne room scene in The Last Jedi.
That scene, when I saw, just talking about The Last Jedi for a second, when I saw that the first time, I thought it looked so cool, and then I saw it a second time, and I was like, what is going on? Nobody's actually doing anything in this fight. That just bothers me. Yeah.
There were a couple things that I spotted that really grabbed my attention. The first being when Kylo just randomly stabs the ground. That was like such a bizarre move to do. It's pretty noticeable too. It's a very like wide swing that he does as he's telegraphing it. The fact that I think a Praetorian guard then hits his blade after he stabs the ground, and then you have one that like is coming in to like do this very wide chop, and he like moves out of the way, and the guard just like runs past him. Like there was stuff that was happening in that shot that like, okay, this is like visually dazzling your first time seeing it, but there are still like noticeable things even on a first viewing.
So,
which is
kind of juxtaposing The Last Jedi with Tenet a little bit, and they're not really like super good comparisons, but at least in Tenet, and this is something that I've kind of felt with all of the new Star Wars films, is the bad guys, even like the goons, felt competent. Like it wasn't a guaranteed win every time you had an encounter between John or the Russians, or anybody in the Russians for that matter. Like there's actual risk of death going on, and I guess just in action films in general, it doesn't feel like many of the bad guys are that threatening, but I felt like that connected in Tenet very well personally.
I guess like I'm trying to think, like, so we have the I mean there's that one moment where I think John is spying on Sator on the boat, and like a henchman spots him and captures him.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like you've okay, I can understand the connection there.
But like not just that, it was also when at the end fight in Skelsk 12, where the Russian guy who was about to drop the algorithm down the pipe or whatever, he had laid the bomb there, and then he ends up shooting Neil. So like he's competent at least, and you don't know much about him. He's not super humanized, but I just felt like it connected on that level. He wasn't a useless prop in that sense.
My question is, why are all of these people going in on this plan to destroy the world that they inhabit?
Yeah, I guess that's one element that I don't super understand. I don't even know if they know exactly what they're getting into. Maybe they're just getting paid very well. But it kind of seems like when I was watching it that Neil's line about not knowing the relationship between consciousness and multiple realities is that even though this reality might be ending, whatever other you exists out there will live in a better reality because of it. And that's not something that's explained super well, I will completely admit, and on that front it's kind of weak, but I guess there are ways to rationalize it.
Yeah, but I mean the thing is like, so if we're if we play a part in ending the reality that we live in right now, sure, there may be some other version of us in a different universe, but it's not going to be the same you. So it's like you're effectively like taking part in ceasing to exist, as well as making everyone else cease to exist. Which, even if we're to buy into the theory that there's a multiverse, and there's like an infinite number of universes in which our selves are living better lives or worse lives or whatever, there's still this one that we have, and we're not going to wake up in the I mean, at least we don't know, we can't know for certain whether we're going to just wake up into a different universe after we die. And so it's just like, I had the same problem when I saw Godzilla King of the Monsters last year. I'm seeing a bunch of faceless mooks, henchmen, soldiers, whatever, that are fighting for a cause to essentially unleash a bunch of monsters to wipe out humanity. And I just have to think, like, I get it that in movies you have to have cannon fodder, you have to have the bad guys to have soldiers and stuff, but like you just have to, think these have to be people, right? They all have their social security numbers, their lives, their families, like, why is it that there's this many people that are willing to basically fight for the world that they live in to be destroyed? Because that's not just going to. It's not like they're taking over the world. It's not like they're conquering another nation. They're going to destroy everything, including themselves, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me unless you can write in some, I don't know, like a death cult sort of thing into it, which they don't really have in Tenet, and we don't know exactly what Sator's henchmen know. But it seems strange that they would be willing to go through all of this trouble without actually knowing what it is they're going to be risking their lives for.
Evan, did that bother you that much in Tenet, not knowing their motivations?
Not really. I just personally, like, I was more interested in what was going on with the plot, like exactly what the heroes were after, like how, especially in that third act, like I was really confused on what the stakes were exactly. Like I knew exactly what was happening with the main villain, but the supporting villains, they just felt like cannon fodder to me. But looking back on that now, that is something that I'm thinking of. Is it's just like exactly what was it? Was it just money, or was it because they seem to be motivated beyond just being paid? It's like they are invested, and exactly what would they be invested in? Because they explain why the main villain wants to die, but I'm not sure about the rest of the people.
Yeah, that might be something to explore further. So I guess as a whole, my opinion on Tenet, and I kind of developed this further in my essay, is I don't think Nolan was trying to write this as an exploration of characters going on a mission. I think the characters were meant to be representative of bigger concepts, and that is like exemplified down to John literally being called the protagonist and everybody else being called the antagonist, and the way the concepts kind of meld together. And I do end up making the argument that both Cat and Southpaw's gone. Shoot. Well, I will let's see if everything good there?
Yeah, I was suddenly I couldn't hear you anymore, and I got disconnected from the call.
Oh no. All right, I'll just start where I remember being. Okay, so basically the film kind of being an exploration of story concepts as a whole, not trying to like go deep into individual characters by, representing them as these bigger concepts like protagonist and antagonist, etc., and like the world ending being the big stakes. And I think on that front he succeeded, and it gets better on repeat watchings, at least in my opinion. But I totally understand everybody who says that it was weak for not having like developed characters. But as far as character development goes, and I am curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I think that Kat is the best developed female character that Nolan has written thus far.
I don't think that there's a competition for that. Like I Nolan's never been really good with female characters.
Yeah, outside of Maul, I think Maul's decent in Inception, but I'd probably go with Kat.
I also, I forget his name, Borden's wife in The Prestige. She had some emotional connection to her, and kind of Murph in Interstellar, but as far as like not just being competent, but an actual good character, I would say Kat was a well-written character for what she was in the film.
Definitely.
So moving on to the next topic, and just kind of broader, Scorsese is noted as saying that Marvel films are like, they're not true cinema because they're an experience, they're a roller coaster. Do you guys see that as being, number one, a problem, like your general view on Marvel films? And then number two, do you see that Tenet, or just Nolan in general, is a theme park movie director?
I would disagree with that. Well, I've never stood by that. Like when Scorsese said that, like I disagreed with him at the premise. And my thing is, I do believe that films are largely about the experience, and some films like have, I think Southpaw even mentioned it with The Matrix. There are plenty of films which are like high octane, or what you might call a blockbuster, which explore very unique concepts. And I don't think that you need to be a grounded film, or what you could call an artsy film, something like what Kubrick or Scorsese made. You don't need to do that while being small. Like, I mean, I mentioned Kubrick just there, but 2001: A Space Odyssey is a great example. That film That film is like incredible to watch, and it's huge. It's one of the biggest movies ever made, but it's aged very well because of the concepts that it explores. So yeah, and I agree that Nolan is a someone who like deals mainly in set of concepts. He doesn't deal as much with characters, and that works to his benefit and to his detriment to a degree. So I'd say that he is like in that realm of creating Marvel movies, but like on a bigger scale and with more interesting ideas going on.
Yeah, that's go ahead, Southpaw.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, just in response to that, Evan, I was going to say that for the most part, I would disagree with like pigeonholing cinema to being one form of expression within filmmaking. But I also do understand where he's coming from in the sense that from what cinema in, I guess, Scorsese's mind being just these deep character-rooted explorations of people as opposed to explorations of concepts and events might come across as like being fundamentally different from what cinema was meant to be. But I do definitely think that's just labeling it too narrowly for actual any creative expression. But go ahead, Southpaw.
Well, yeah, I found Scorsese's comments to be like needlessly gatekeepy. I think it's funny that we're talking about that comment in relation to Nolan, who made two of the better superhero movies ever that are actually pretty substantive. And I would say that like the Marvel movies for sure. Okay, so like the MCU, yeah, they're popcorn flicks first and foremost, and they're not really going to delve into all the complexities of human nature and everything. They're there to be accessible for like a mass audience, and that's going to include teenagers and young kids. You know, like these are simple concepts that like families should all be able to like go to these movies and enjoy together. You know,
right? A family can't go to Taxi Driver and get that much out of it.
Or Parasite even, you know, like Parasite's a very good film. I would say that Parasite is a better film than anything in the MCU, but it's not going to like the Marvel movies aren't trying to be Parasite, and so it's just what I will say is that when Marvel Studios does like go for a smaller story, when they aren't doing these end of the world plots, they've proven that they can do excellent, really substantive character work. And the best example of this is in Daredevil. And the best example of this in Daredevil is actually in the weakest season of Daredevil. Daredevil has two excellent seasons. Like so season 1 is very good. Season 2 is like kind of middling, right? Like it's better than anything that the CW put out, but it's also like it's not as good as the first one. Season 3 is like probably the best superhero television we've ever gotten. But season 2 still has there's elements of it that are probably better than anything in season 3, and that has to be Daredevil versus Frank Castle. Frank Castle elevates season 2 by a long shot. If Frank Castle weren't in season 2 of Daredevil, it would probably just be a garbage season. Okay, but when he is on screen and when he is getting to argue with Daredevil about what's the right way to take the law into your own hands and everything, the whole morality behind killing the criminals or letting them live or whatever. It's such an interesting and well-written conversation that the two of them have on that rooftop. That like I would say it's even better than the interrogation room scene in The Dark Knight. Like it very well might be my favorite scene in any superhero media ever, because both sides are allowed to present very compelling arguments. And it's crazy because I feel like I'm overall more sympathetic towards Daredevil, but I can't say that I entirely disagree with Frank Castle either. It's such a like I would say it sets the gold standard for how you write an argument between characters.
Right.
And it's it covers something a lot deeper than most superhero stories are willing to like really go. You know, Arrow tried to do this whole thing about the Green Arrow is killing people in season 1, and they're like really wringing their hands over how terrible that is and everything. But I don't feel like they ever like tackled this issue with the same amount of substance and depth as Daredevil did. And so if you took if you streamlined the Punisher subplot in season 2 of Daredevil to like a 2-hour long movie, and you like gave it a theatrical release, I would say that very much qualifies as cinema. So it's like I don't like this idea that superhero films can't be cinema, Marvel films can't be cinema, but if we're talking about stuff like I don't know, like the Avengers movies, the Avengers movies, they aren't on the same par as like Parasite or Taxi Driver.
What would you say about that, Evan?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on the film. It depends on the filmmaker. Like I've appreciated the Russo brothers in terms of their Captain America movies, but in particular, like I think that Civil War and Winter Soldier are actually very well written. And as Southpaw was mentioning, it's probably because those films don't have end of the world stakes, and they're a lot more grounded than you typically see with Marvel movies. So I'd say there are films which pull it off, and obviously Daredevil is an example that I would jump to, particularly for the dialogue that it deals with. But you know, like Southpaw said as well, like films like made by the MCU, they're meant to be seen by a general audience. They're meant to be very accessible. So you're typically not going to get as much exploration of character or theme that you would inside of a film like Parasite or The Lighthouse or 1917. But at the same time, you get a good time, and you can get a little bit of substance. It depends on what's being achieved by the filmmakers. So I'd say I personally would consider them cinema. I consider pretty much all of filmmaking to be cinema, but for Scorsese's definition, I would say I think stuff like superhero movies and Marvel films can achieve that.
Yeah, that's a really good look at that, and kind of exploration of how I guess superhero films relate to what is cinema. But in the most broad explanation possible, both Southpaw and Evan, what do you define as cinema?
Pretty much filmmaking. Like I go as broad as possible, because it's like I think making a movie pretty much constitutes you as cinema. It's like, you know, there are different films which explore different things. You have films that were made like by Stanley Kubrick, and like I would label something like Barry Lyndon as being probably what Scorsese is referring to when he talks about like character-based dramas that like explore high concepts. Like that movie is amazing, and it's shot immaculately, and at the same time it has a great character at the base of it, and it has very compelling scenes. And it's like, you don't get something like that inside of most Marvel movies, but at the same time, it's like they're still movies, and I would still consider them cinema, even if they're not high, like if they're not like high tier cinema. That's probably, I've talked about this with my brothers, and I think that that's probably what I would go to in terms of like high exploration or high tier cinema. That's probably what I would refer to as what Scorsese's referring to as cinema. Mm-hmm. But for filmmaking, I think if you are a movie, you are cinema.
Do you think it needs a theatrical release for it to be classified as cinema, or do you think short films can be cinema?
Oh, I absolutely think short films can be cinema, and I don't know if I'd say theatrical release, but surely I would definitely put a standard onto it in terms of like what qualifies you as, because I don't think someone just making a video in the backyard necessarily makes you cinema. You do need something in terms of the filmmaking involved and the craft that came with it. It's just a matter of like what you've put into your work.
Sure. I don't think that you need a theatrical release to count as cinema. I also think, short films can absolutely qualify as cinema. My agreement on what Scorsese says kind of hinges upon like what exactly it is he means. If he's saying that So like cinema, yeah. If you take the word literally, like Evan does, it's just it kind of applies to all of filmmaking. What I think Scorsese was trying to mean was like it's not high art, it's not high tier, which is like yeah, it's not. But the thing is, it's just like to saying it the way he said it, it seemed just again very gatekeepy.
Pretentious.
I feel like it's a bit pretentious. But of course, I'm not arguing that Avengers Endgame is high art, or that like Marvel can't make a like an actual work of high art. But it's just like it's certainly what they're delivering now is not going to cut it. But I don't think that that's what they're really aiming for, anyways.
Do you think Joker is high art cinema?
That's a good question. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be. Yeah, I wouldn't put Joker up there with The Lighthouse.
I think I'd put that similarly to The Dark Knight in terms of like it explores. It's in that realm. It's up there. It's definitely like peak tier when it comes to like superhero or genre films, but I wouldn't necessarily call it high art, even though it is very well written, very well performed and put together. I don't think I would qualify that necessarily as high art.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like maybe the only superhero film that's I mean, it's not even a superhero film. Like Birdman, I consider to be high art. But it's not a superhero film. It's just like it's a film about a washed up superhero actor, you know. That's a I'm trying to think like what would a high art superhero film look like exactly. I mean I gave my example of the discussion between Punisher and Daredevil, of course, because yeah, like if you had like a whole 2.5 hours where the characters really have, like, I'm not talking a single scene that goes on for that long, right? Like, you have to have a story, of course. But if you have like multiple back and forths between those characters, and you can like throw in, action sequences, throughout the story, as long as they come at natural points of the plot. I feel like, yeah, you could actually make a Marvel movie that would count as cinema under Scorsese's definition if you were to like cut Daredevil in that manner and then release it.
So if you took Joker and you renamed it Arthur and you got rid of the Batman's parents being shot scene and the Wayne Manor scene, do you think that would be high art cinema? Or do you think the fact that it's like labeled into this DC super genre universe that lowers its entry barrier?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that is, I don't think that those factors are what I would say is the reason that I wouldn't call it high art. I think you could, like, I think that works to the film's advantage. The fact that, like, for the most part, if you just change the characters' names and you took out a few elements and you said X thing is not like related to the comics at all, that film could pass as not even being a superhero film. That's one of the things that I think makes that film very effective, is it isn't like reliant on the comics to be a good movie. But I'd say that you could use those elements in relation to the comics and still make a film that's high art. But like I said, I don't think I would consider Joker to be high art as it is, and with the elements that exist in it.
So what do you think it would take for Joker to become high art? Like, if you were to go back and take the existing Joker cut or script or whatever, and then you say, I'm going to make a Scorsese level high art cinema masterpiece, I guess, what would you change or add to Joker to make it that?
Potentially different subplots and maybe a little more exploration of character. I'm not exactly sure what would be additional that would make it like high art. It would just be a matter of what was added and what was altered. But I think I would change a few of the plots, particularly to probably explore more interesting concepts and maybe a little more of Arthur's character outside of like his past necessarily.
Yeah,
I
that's.
think that I would.
Go ahead. Sorry, I keep cutting you off. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. We keep on so Evan stops talking. I think that this is a good time for me to interject. And okay, so I think what I would go for is to flesh out the film's social commentary a little bit. Actually, I think that the film there's traces of an interesting social commentary in there, but like the social commentary that's in Parasite is a little bit more overt. It's the focus of the story, whereas what we see of the class division in Joker is much less overt. It's there, yes, but that's not what the story is necessarily about.
Right.
And if you focused on that a little bit more, you could make something that could potentially have like a lasting effect on, I don't know, just the public consciousness more so than what we have now. Something a little bit more substantive, something that has a bit clearer of a message to it. I certainly appreciate that it's like they would certainly acknowledge the differences between classes that's in the film. Like they do it already, right? Like it's there, it's depicted in that way. But it's not the focus of the story. And I'm not asking for ham-fisted CW type social commentary where they're just like, wow, okay, they're just
telling
basically
you.
It's a Facebook debate. It's a Facebook comments debate that's being put in the script, right? No, if it was something closer to Parasite, in regards to like really trying to compare the struggles of this poor aspiring comedian with someone like Thomas Wayne, whether or not you change his name, right? There could be a lot of there could be strong potential for that to be considered cinema. Yes.
So I guess, do you know the YouTuber Houston Productions one?
Yes.
So have you seen his critique of Joker?
That was covered on my second podcast, I believe.
Oh wow, I need to go back and watch it. So do you mind filling me in on just kind of how that went?
I remembered him talking a lot about how it's just like Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. It's been a while since I've covered it, right? So I've covered a number of things since then, and there's been a number of topics that have taken my attention. So, fuck, man.
Do you agree with his assertions there? Because I remember him saying that he had problems with the social commentary of it. But as far as King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, do you think that it pulls too heavily from those films?
No.
Okay, yeah, I would agree with that. I've never really gotten those critiques just because they're elements, but I mean, there are elements you can be found in lots of different movies that can link up with that. But that does
Simpsons did it.
Go ahead.
The South Park episode. Simpsons did it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they're very tertiary elements. Like, people have literally cited, like, Arthur putting, like, a finger gun to his head as being a comparison to Taxi Driver. It's just like, dude, that is so thin, and it's like, what element was taken from Taxi Driver, which is, like, fundamental and, like, is, like, almost like a ripoff and completely derivative. It's like, I don't think there's pretty much anything inside of that film. Everything is just, like narrative elements which are very different and not really translated or like taken one for one from the film.
I watched Taxi Driver and King of Comedy and Joker pretty much back to back, and they're all very different experiences for me. They're like, when watching Joker, I didn't feel like I was rewatching King of Comedy or Taxi Driver. So I'm like Rags, I'm pretty frustrated with seeing all the people just, asserting that Joker is a ripoff of Taxi Driver. Mm-hmm. Without like really having much evidence to back that up.
I think it's one of those film criticism bandwagons that sounds nice, but with a lot of thought put into it, doesn't really hold its own weight.
Like if a better like comparison, right, for like how this movie is taking so many elements from this other movie is so I have this question. You've seen Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, right?
Many times, yeah.
Okay, so then there's this other movie. Have you ever seen this movie called Aragon?
Yep, I have. Dude, I used to be so into that movie, embarrassingly, and the books. But
Oh
yeah.
my god. So yeah, Aragon rips off a ton of stuff from Star Wars.
Yep.
It is the Star Wars formula, just like copied and pasted. They just changed the setting to it's medieval. It's a medieval setting, and like that's pretty much like the only thing that like might not be in there is like the destruction of Alderaan. I don't think that they do anything close to that in Aragon.
Not really, no.
That's like the one thing. That's like the one thing that's changed. And I guess they also have the thing where in Star Wars there isn't a dragon that instantly becomes an adult after being struck by lightning or something. Yeah, like that's a case where, okay, yeah, you can very accurately compare. There's like multiple elements that this movie shares in common, specific elements, specific plot beats and character archetypes, you know, that this movie has basically copied and pasted into its script. But Joker with the King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, not one of those instances, I feel.
For sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. Just to kind of top off the Joker discussion really quickly, do you think that DC, just as a unit, should try to emulate the Joker formula, i.e., being able to make a film that if you just switched around the names and characters, it could hold its own? Like, do you think that's something they should continue to do, or just dive full into the fantastical, comical elements, kind of how Marvel does it?
Well, they're trying to emulate Marvel, and it's not working with the DCEU. I'd say like Joker is the first good movie that has come from a DC property since The Dark Knight. It's only taken 12 years. People might say, but Wonder Woman's good. No, it's not. It's
not
like
that good.
Okay at best. But Aquaman is good. No, it's not. It's actually pretty bad. It's fun, but it's bad. But Shazam is very good. No, it's not. It's very funny.
Disagree. I really like Shazam. I'm not going to defend
you like
it.
Shazam.
I do.
Okay. Oh,
I'm kind of a David Sandberg stan, but I mean, I really like Lights Out. I see a lot of his isms in Shazam. Like, I don't know if he's the right director for the job in that sense, but as far as like, it was just a breath of fresh air as far as DC goes. Like after Suicide Squad, come on.
Yes. It's better than Suicide Squad. It's better than Justice League. It's one of the 3 best DCEU films. It is. I'd say it's second to Wonder Woman. It's better than Aquaman. You know, so it's like...
Oh, you'd say Wonder Woman is better than Shazam.
I would say that Wonder Woman is better than Shazam in terms of like structural integrity. There's a lot of stuff I could point out about Shazam to you. But I don't think that's the point of this podcast. I think Evan understands what I'm talking about specifically.
Oh yeah, there's a lot.
I agree that there's plenty of like elements, like the 7 deadly sins scene felt weird,
very out of place.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I'll more critical stuff, right? So the whole movie only happens because Savannah, when he gets his powers. So for one thing, the wizard doesn't just zap his hand away like he did when Savannah was a kid. Dumb. Then Savannah gets his powers and he zaps the wizard, knocks him unconscious. At this point, Savannah is possessed by like the 7 sins, who are all capable of killing the wizards, which we know because the wizard said that the sins killed his siblings, his fellow wizards. And you would think that the sins would want to go ahead and finish off the wizard, just make sure he's dead, so that he can't give someone else the powers of Shazam and everything. They don't, and so the entire plot happens because of that. Like, okay, you have bullies are allowed to just like run over a disabled kid on school property and carry nunchucks on school property that has the metal detectors and everything. What you have, and then like this is the one that like really kills me. This is the one that like absolutely fucks with me, because this affects the conflict that kind of drives the third act. So they have like these YouTube videos of them testing Billy's powers, right? Yep. And Freddy uploads them. Okay, so Evan, you know what's about to happen, right?
Oh yes.
Okay, so
I'm nervous.
I want you to imagine. Well, just a simple question. Do you think that the whole conflict that occurs because Freddy wants Billy to show up to the school in his superhero form to impress the bullies, do you think that all makes sense?
No.
Okay. I'm sure that you know why. It's like, so the bullies don't believe you when you say you know the superhero.
Yeah.
You have a phone that, you know, you could, like, if you were to tell someone, hey, I'm the thought theater, right? Like, let's say that you're a big YouTuber at this point, and someone meets you, recognizes your voice, and you just like, you prove it by like, you just open up your phone. There's my YouTube channel right there, right?
Yeah.
So he could just do that. He could also pull up a YouTube video where like he shows up on camera in multiple of these videos, actually. And they show a student. This isn't just a thing that we see like during the montage. It's like, well, maybe they edited that out. No, they show a different student watching a video of Freddy pushing Billy off a building to test his flying powers. I was like, no. So it's confirmed that they're not editing Freddy out of these videos. And no one recognizes that it's Freddy. Like, and then you have just this. Like, this is the thing. This drives the entire conflict of the third act. And then to top it all off, you have the way that the climax is set up. You have to have Savannah find out where Billy lives, take his family hostage. So how do they do this? Well, they get into a fight in a shopping mall, and Freddy follows them into the shopping mall. And then as Freddy is like, you know, looking for Billy after Billy escapes and disappears, Savannah sees him standing right next to a TV in the mall playing news footage of him arguing with Billy after the bus saving stuff. And then you rewind to the scene where he's arguing with Billy, and you find that the news cameraman actually just walks away and isn't actually even filming that. So it's like, well, then how is this news station broadcasting this? It's like, it is one of the, and then there's all the stuff happening in the final fight itself, which, well, we're not even going to get into all that stuff. But it's just like, there is some critical story elements that drive me crazy about Shazam. And listen, I do get like, there's certain payoffs that are great. There's like, I think that the stuff with Billy finding out that his mom abandoned him, good stuff. The stuff with him accepting his adoptive family towards the end, good stuff. It's like there's payoffs that do work. Like, I'm not saying it's like a terrible movie. Even though it sounds like I am. I'm ripping on what I think to be pretty terrible writing. Like terribly written elements of the story. And then you have, I'm trying to think, like, okay, so like the other big thing to me is just the way that the film frames the conflict between Billy and Freddy. Do you think that Freddy has a point about Billy being selfish with his powers and everything, and when he choose out Billy for not making it to the school, not honoring a commitment that he never really committed to?
So I kind of do, and I guess the reason why is, if I'm looking from the perspective of these kids where family is both a foreign element but also something that they strive for, when you make this connection and then like your older brother gets the new toy or just something really cool, you kind of presume that connection. And you know, they're still kids, so I get where they're coming from. I feel like I've experienced that thing with my own family, but I think it's not poorly written. I think it could have been written better, but I get where it's coming from.
Well, I get where Freddy is coming from, sure. The problem is that when he's chewing out Billy, like right before the, sorry, right after
The bus scene.
him saving the bus, yeah, after the bus scene, he's chewing out Billy, and Billy is he's not really fighting back when he has a pretty reasonable case that seems rather obvious to me. Like, you've been kind of taking advantage of my powers too, and now that I'm just doing it for myself, you're acting all high and mighty. It's very hypocritical, and so it's like, and this is a thing that bothers me a lot when a story is taking, like, it appears to be taking this stance, right, in which this is when you're not writing a conflict as well as Daredevil versus the Punisher, where Daredevil versus the Punisher, on that rooftop, they are fully fleshing out both of their perspectives. The characters' experiences form those perspectives, and it makes sense. It all makes sense as to why Matt feels the way that he does. It makes sense why Frank feels the way that he does. And they're both allowed to make their case, even though I think that we're supposed to agree with Daredevil more. But the thing is, the writers are mature enough that they know, they trust their audience to be smart enough to make that conclusion by themselves, and they don't really need to hold their hands. Whereas something like Shazam, The Last Jedi, Last of Us Part 2, you have, it's framed in such a manipulative way. It removes the character that's pretty much clearly in the right, his agency, from like being able to explain his position, so that the writer can make the side that they agree with seem a lot better in comparison. So we're not just dealing with like in-universe Freddy feels this way. We're dealing with the filmmakers appear to even be taking his side. And this is not just by the fact that Billy isn't really like fighting back, but also like the emotional like piano music that's playing during this whole thing. Freddy's never called out for being like a hypocrite here. It rubs me off the wrong way,
Yeah, I totally, like, those criticisms, I fully affirm their validity. I think the Freddy-Billy interactions definitely could have been structured better without, like, a more manipulative approach to the concepts. But I think as far as, I don't know how much Sandberg had in writing the script, but with what he had and with what had come before, I do think, as far as just DC film goes and superhero films, it was one of those that I came out of it enjoying it and not feeling the need to criticize it as much as something like, Man of Steel or Suicide Squad.
That I can relate to. I can totally relate to. My favorite experience watching Shazam was the first time when I didn't really have this fully critical eye. I was just pleasantly surprised that it wasn't absolute shit. It was actually kind of enjoyable. It didn't. The thing was, I watch a movie, I like it enough. I'm like you. I go and see it multiple times. It just held up less and less upon each viewing for me.
Right.
So that's. I thought you were wanting to mention something about like criticizing a film based on a single viewing.
Oh yeah, so I was about to segue into that. Do you think, and Evan as well, obviously, that we should, and I guess the Rotten Tomatoes crowd, or just film criticism on YouTube as a whole, should base, or should even start to criticize a film after a first viewing? Do you think that review should go public after just seeing it one time?
I think it's fair to release a video after like you've seen it one time, but I often find that like the best reviews are the ones when like a film has come out for a long period of time and people have had a chance to rewatch it and really analyze it scene by scene and like take in everything that's happened, because it can be hard to absorb everything that happens instead of a film when you've only seen it once in the theaters. Like you can basically give some basic thoughts and explain what you liked or what you thought was well written, but it's like I think personally, until you've like rewatched the film and seen it and like really given it a chance and thought about it hard, like it's not the case in all cases, but I do think for the most part, like seeing a film again and like reviewing it after it's been out for a while, that can lead to a better review.
Yeah.
I agree with that completely. I think that like when you're watching a movie for the first time, you can be really swept up in the experience, and I don't think that's a bad thing. You know, usually when I'm enjoying a movie, I enjoy it most during a first viewing. That was certainly the case for Avengers Endgame, right? Where I wasn't thinking about any of like the really messy plot stuff. You know, it was an enjoyable experience. Okay. However, it's like if I were to review Avengers Endgame right after having seen it for the first time, I wouldn't have come to a very accurate determination of its quality. And so it's like, while I think it's valid to, you know, you make a video and you say, here's my first impressions of it. Here's what I think, you know, or even if you take some time for just a couple of days to think about it, just ruminate on it for a little bit. Like there's value to that, but there's also, you know, I would say if you want to make the best possible video, then yeah, seeing it multiple times is going to be important to memorizing certain like plot details or lines of dialogue, or you know, like I didn't catch the fact that Neil was at the opera in the beginning of Tenet until my second time around. Like that realization didn't really dawn on me, because by the time that I got to the point, the reveal of the orange cord on Neil's backpack in my first viewing, I had forgotten that there was a similar cord on the dude's backpack that saves John in the opera, because there's just so much other stuff that's happening.
Yeah, there's like 0.2 seconds that Nolan zooms in on it before there's nothing else.
Yeah, so you go into to Tenet to see it a second time, and you remember the orange cord from the ending of the movie, and then you're at the beginning of the movie and you see that same thing. It's like, okay, now I remember this.
Right.
So yeah, like if I'm not going to review Tenet, but if I reviewed Tenet right after seeing it, I really would have had a very poor grasp on what it was going for. And I do think, Evan, I do recommend you see it at least a second time, even without subtitles, which is like, I am going to see it a third time with subtitles when it comes out on Blu-ray, because the audio mixing is just crap. Although it was less noticeably crap on my second viewing. Like I was able to understand more of the dialogue, but there were still like parts of it where character accents are too heavy, or background noise is too loud, or they're wearing these oxygen masks, and so their dialogue is very muffled. However, I at least understood, okay, so they're acknowledging stuff like the grandfather paradox, and whether like, so is it when they're going back in time, are they like fated to do the exact same things that their past selves saw them do? It's like, well, if you look at it from like a deterministic standpoint, yeah, that would actually make a whole lot of sense. That's kind of like a catch-all defense for it, I suppose, kind of like what Arrival has.
Interesting.
Evan, what do you think about that?
I think it's very similar to Arrival in that regard, and that was kind of one of my issues with the whole. If there was a scene that that was on YouTube right now that I could rewatch, it would be the bullet catching scene, because a lot of the rules are broken down in that scene, and one of them was the whole idea of free will. Like John asked about that, and he said, like, does this take away from free will? And I believe that she said no. And that was one thing towards the end there, is like he said, is it fate? And he's like, I call it reality. And it's like, it's the whole idea of like, you have free will, but you do these things because you always chose to do them this way. And it's just like, I feel like that takes away from free will in the end, because everything unfolds the same way.
Are you familiar with the concept of, what is it called? It's like mirror free will. That's not the actual term of it, but basically what it means is like, if you're standing in a mirror and you raise your hand, the mirror is going to raise its hand like opposite. So like you have the free will to do that, but the mirror view, whatever, it's not a super good example, but basically the way it translates to the film is, let's say, so the best scene to kind of use it as an example is the interrogation scene with Sator in the red room, blue room, you can see your future self in the other room. So obviously that like gets rid of the ability of you to choose not to go into the room. But the counter argument of that would be, in that reality, you would never see yourself in the other room if you in the future wouldn't have gone there. So maybe it is still determinism, but you still choose whether or not you get there. You just see the events happening in the future. I don't know. That was probably really confusing.
I don't have a problem with free will not technically existing in Tenet, because I don't even think that free will is a thing. Like, philosophically speaking, I'm a determinist. I used to think about this stuff a whole lot. Have you guys read Sam Harris's book on free will?
Yes, and I disagree with it.
You disagree with it?
I do.
Okay. Why?
Well, because, so first of all, I would say that if determinism is real, then there is no moral accountability for anybody. So, every crime that's ever... Why?
So they're not being like free will necessarily. I still think that we can form values based on what is right and wrong, and I think that there's if we so if I don't have, let's say, a principle against murder, what's stopping me from murdering someone, right? Well, and then I have to think about, like, well, why do I have a principle against murder, right? What's allowing me to have a principle against murder? It could be my upbringing. It could be just the environment that I was raised in. It could be the time that I was raised in. My ability to empathize with someone might be different from another individual's. Like, an individual could have a malfunctioning amygdala, which will make it harder for them to actually empathize with another person.
Sure.
And so there's aspects to our decision-making process that we don't really get to choose. We don't get to choose who our parents are, what country we're born in, and we don't get to choose how our brain functions. And those
access
are three...
to the reality. You'd say there's an imbalance in access to the reality that kind of leads to a dichotomy between, like, true free will and determinist traits of the world you live in. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Basically, yeah. Like the decision-making process as to whether or not you decide to have a cup of coffee, or if you've already had a second cup of coffee, they're going to be formed based on experiences that have happened to you that aren't of your, like, volition. So
you would say that every event that occurs is basically just balancing on the principle of sufficient reason, that, like, every action, every thought that you have is dependent on another prior action, which is, like, just an infinite regress.
Well, it's cause and effect, yes. But so I will say, of course, there's cause and effect, but there is also, like, chaos where, shit happens to us, but that's going to have effects. So it's like, it still would technically count as under cause and effect.
What would you define as determinism in your worldview then?
Well, I think that we have an illusion of free will, technically. Yeah.
Okay, so do you think that the future is set, or do you think that it's open and every action that is, in progress is just going to have a cause that we can predict? Or an effect that we can predict from the current causes?
I don't think necessarily that the future is set, but we're talking about like you're talking about in the real world, right? Not in relation to Tenet.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't say that I know for certain. But I'm certainly okay with a story like Tenet deciding to go, yes, the future is set, and the past is set too. Like, if you're basically a slave of sorts to what's already happened or what will happen. Those are things that I'm fine with being established in a story, and like isn't that not what TENET basically does?
I do, yeah, I would agree. And I think like the one scene that really exemplifies that, or at least Neil's concept of reality or fate, is when John goes back onto the highway to stop the algorithm from getting into Sator's hands. It still happens. That like even despite him trying, even going back in time isn't going to stop something that's already set in reality. But then again, that point is kind of critiqued by Neil at the end, where he said, you can call it fate, you can call it whatever you want, but what's happened, but it's not an excuse to do nothing. So I think in that not excuse to do nothing part is like, reality is set, but you're still compelled to choose it, even if it's just an illusion, and that's enough to choose it, I guess. Maybe that's the point it's trying to make. Sure.
And regarding like morality, so I don't think that morality or moral accountability should no longer be a thing, just because, well, technically speaking, free will is an illusion. I think that there's still a concept of right and wrong that we've constructed in society, in civilization across thousands of years, and one's inability to properly perceive that or like process all that because of like whatever it is in their head or their upbringing that is affecting them. That doesn't mean that they're suddenly immune from being held accountable for that.
Sure. So I guess my argument for free will in the real world, and I guess something that I like seeing translated in movies, is that even though the universe is kind of largely deterministic, humans, or at least consciousness, can be self-determining. Because, I mean, like, if every event in the universe has led to me killing somebody and that was determined, I don't know why you would be upset about that if it was an unavoidable reality. Like, that just seems like a waste of time to me, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure if I would say it's unavoidable.
If it is avoidable, how would it be determined?
Well, I would say that it was determined by again, where you were born, exactly when you were born, your experiences that affect you in certain ways. People generally tend to not be able to control how they're going to react to certain traumas. And so I'm like, I don't know exactly what the circumstances are for you killing this person hypothetically. But there's various instances of like, well, a person with PTSD killing someone because of a like a flashback that they get to what caused their PTSD, right? They get an episode and they flip out and they inadvertently kill someone. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily to be, I mean, I think you and I would both agree, that's not the same thing as like consciously, deliberately planning on murdering someone.
Right.
And then murdering them. However, the circumstances that made someone contemplate and plan out and deliberately execute that murder, they're like the circumstances as well as just their like what is how their brain chemistry works, right? Just how their brain works, how it's affected by what they've experienced. It's not going to be the exact same as you or me. So it's just like, technically speaking, sure, free will is an illusion from my perspective. However, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here because this is a lot deeper than I was expecting it to be. Fuck, where was I going with this?
Okay, I think
a boomer
what
moment.
you're trying to say is that because every human being on the planet has different experiences that have shaped their perception of reality, that every choice they make can essentially be traced back to one of those things. So in that sense, you are always determined to pick something based on prior cause.
Yeah, unless you like were to, I don't know, like just randomly, like spaz out and pick something completely antithetical to, like what you would do, I guess. Like, I guess if we're to talk about character assassination, right? Character assassinations are criticized because this is not the character that we know because okay, so Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi is not the character that we know from the original trilogy.
Right.
We don't have the context for why he is this way. We have the context for why he is a certain way in the original trilogy, but not for the way that he is in The Last Jedi.
Well, they try, but it doesn't, like his... Well, I guess that would be an example of your, like, someone spazzing out. It kind of seemed like that's what was happening with him and Kylo Ren, but I don't think that's a good enough reason to determine, like, the literal fate of his character in that movie.
Well, wait, so, are you referring... I'm sorry, can you repeat that real quick?
Yeah, so I was going off of, like, you said we don't really have context as to why Luke Skywalker is how he is in The Last Jedi, and I would say they tried to link that to, his spazzing out on Kylo Ren, but I don't think that, like, that moment had enough context for itself that it would determine the fate of his character, basically the way he goes out in The Last Jedi.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. I also, the reason for bringing that up, of course, is because, we could say, well, just because Luke is a certain way in the original trilogy, just because he's had, like this set of values this whole time that's been ingrained into him, that doesn't mean that it's out of the realm of possibility for him to contemplate murdering his nephew as he sleeps.
Right.
Which, that's like, okay, yeah, if free will is truly a thing, then sure, like anyone is capable of anything, I guess. But as far as I'm concerned, yeah, no, there's limits to what people can do. There's limits to what we are willing to do, and those are going to be based upon our values, and those values are going to be based upon stuff that we don't really have much control over. And again, people don't really get to choose how they react to certain experiences. They don't really get to choose how it affects them. Losing your parents in an alleyway to a gunman might affect most children in a certain way, and it affects Bruce Wayne a completely different way.
Right.
It may not motivate them to, give them this drive to become a vigilante and fight crime, but that's what it did for Bruce Wayne. And
so in that sense, it was like based on him being Bruce Wayne, he was determined to become Batman based on his reaction to that. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Well, based on how his brain chemistry would have worked, yeah, that's which I don't think is something that he would have necessarily chosen.
Yeah, that's a really good analysis of it. Actually, I agree with that.
He doesn't get to choose the brain that sees your parents being brutally murdered, and then the response to that, instead of just falling into depression and never getting over it, is, I'm going to prevent this from happening to as many kids as possible, and I'm going to dress up like a bat and fight crime. That's Bruce Wayne's brain that he didn't pick.
Right. Okay, yeah. I would agree with that.
That's my understanding of it. But I'm 24, and I am not a neuroscience or a philosophy major, so I'm a bit out of my depth. And I was really surprised that we've gone down this rabbit trail.
I mean, I'm not mad. I think it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, and circling back to Tenet, and Arrival. I'm fine with Arrival and Tenet having those catch-all explanations because it's technically an explanation that I can buy in real life.
Sure.
And it's something that I kind of wanted to explore in like my own book series where I'm talking about the justice system. It's like, it is a little messed up that we we have like a justice system that's predicated on this idea of free will, but it's not really there. But it's also kind of a necessary lie,
Right.
or illusion. So it's like it's just interesting stuff. Interesting stuff in general. So yeah.
So
that's
because like a lot of the people that I've interacted with just in the critique of Tenet is one of their biggest things is like the movie can't decide on whether its physics impact free will or not. And I would say, like, based on what we agree on here, is that the point of the movie isn't actually trying to say whether or not like there is free will, just about how like experiencing that in time relates to the way things eventually turn out despite what we try, which I think is a more interesting discussion as to whether or not it actually exists.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Evan?
I think I'd agree with that to a degree. I honestly did have a decent problem with the whole idea of like free will and how the technology is used and how characters interact with it. Like for me, I think if you're exploring that type of a concept, you need to have solid character work to back it because you need to understand why the characters choose to do the things that they do. Like the dialogue between John and Neil at the end is actually pretty solid for exploring that, but you don't get a lot of scenes like that. So it's pretty difficult to understand like why exactly the characters make the choices that they do, because that's fundamental when you're dealing with the concept like the movie explores.
I would say that the dinner scene between Kat and John near the beginning of the film actually is pretty solid in setting up her relationship to the whole situation and her motivation.
How so?
So, like, she's basically explaining that she's chained to this relationship, but her son is what keeps her going, which is, like, ultimately why the "and my son," well, that includes my son line when it says that it'll kill everybody. That doesn't bother me because her son is her character's whole motivation. So, like, right after the dinner ends, she goes out in the car, and she's, like, clearly distraught about that because not only is she witnessing the effects of her husband's toxicity on her, but also like seeing that happen to somebody else who, like, in her eyes presumably has good intentions. So setting up like the way she empathizes and also her relationship to Sator and her situation as a whole, that does a really good job of exemplifying that. And it has the payoff at the end where the driver doesn't want to leave until Sator gets what he wants, which is in this case her pain in seeing this person trying to interact and make a connection just be beat up and left on the ground because, you know, Sator is wielding his power. But the payoff is when, after the kitchen fight, it's John who steps out unfazed and the driver quickly leaves, and apparently she's like, my husband doesn't always get what he wants. So I think that whole scene actually does a really good job in setting up those relationships and motivations.
Yeah, that part's solid.
So just as a broad kind of analysis there. So the final thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is in this podcast is what, in your guys' opinions, and I'll start with Evan this time, what do you think film essayists and reviewers should aim to do more often that would yield more productive discussion on films?
I think, honestly, in the broadest sense, I'd probably say essentially defining your terms and being as clear and accurate as possible. Like, I think people who make video essays oftentimes are a little bit too vague. They're a little bit too emotional, and like I get that you're trying to manipulate your audience to a degree, or at least persuade your audience, but my goal, and I think what most video essays' goal should be, is to persuade and to inform. So it's like you're going to persuade someone of your position, and at the same time, you're perhaps going to teach them certain things that maybe you've learned inside of your research. Mm-hmm. So I would prefer if they were a little less emotion-based and more fact-based, more about the references, more about your evidence, and at the same time, the passion, because that's something that I think is very important too when it comes to video essays, because everything shouldn't be cookie cutter and just formulaic, because then people aren't going to care as much. People aren't going to care unless they can care about the person behind it. So the passion, the accuracy, and the sense of being able to persuade someone. That's what I think would make video essays better.
So to kind of add to that, here's a question, and that would be in relation to like your emotional reaction to the film. If you can find objective qualities about the film that made you emotionally react that way, but maybe not for everybody else, do you think that's useful to define so someone doesn't think you're just, you know, you have a scene that really connected with you, but you don't really say why, but you know for a fact it did? If you can pinpoint those objective qualities, do you think that's something that could be implemented into the emotional discussion to make it more fact and evidence based?
Oh, absolutely. In all honesty, there's a couple of movies that are like that for me that I want to make videos like that, and it's hard. I think it's very difficult to do that, but I think it can be done right if you have the right evidence. Like a movie like Groundhog Day, that is potentially my all-time favorite film, and
Wow.
there's a lot that I would argue for merit of filmmaking inside of that film, but at the same time, I have a strong emotional connection to it because of my experience with my family in watching it and how many times I've seen it over the course of my life and the different experiences I've had watching it. And there are certain emotional parts to that film which I think have a basis in objectivity, but it's difficult to express that. But I think if you can do it right, you can essentially support your emotions with factual evidence, and those I think can make for very interesting videos. I've seen a couple that are like that have like used strong references to like explain why they care so much about a certain piece of media, and it's interesting when it's done right.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to that, Southpaw, and just your general thoughts on it as well?
I just want to second what Evan said about backing up what you're saying with references. For the love of God, like, actually refer to evidence that's presented in the narrative, because there's I'm fine with ambiguity and speculation in storytelling. I actually think that some of the better stories allow there to be room for alternative interpretations.
Like The Lighthouse.
The Lighthouse, yes. The Lighthouse, and one of my favorite movies ever is Prisoners. Have you seen Prisoners?
With Gyllenhaal?
Yes.
I saw it a few years ago. I don't remember it very much, though. I was not very critical of films then. It was sort of just watching it for the sake of watching it, but fill me in on whatever you're going to say.
Well, I think that we should, maybe the three of us and Buzz should watch it all together at some point.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
It's Thanksgiving, baby.
Very
total
yes,
Thanksgiving movie.
It's the perfect Thanksgiving movie. It's like it and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, the two best Thanksgiving movies ever made. The ending involves Hugh Jackman has been thrown into the pit that the serial killer's victims have been like thrown into when she's kidnapping them, and I believe he's shot. And so he's like bleeding out from a wound. And the last that we see of him, he finds the plastic whistle that his daughter had. And the last scene of the movie shows Gyllenhaal's character, Detective Loki, at the house of this the serial killer that he shot. CSIs are finishing up work for the night, and they're leaving. And now it's just Loki there. And it's like dead quiet, and then suddenly he hears like a very faint whistle, and you know it catches his attention, and then he's like, maybe I'm just hearing things, and then he hears it again, and then that like perks his ears up further, and then the movie just cuts to black, and there's so much left to the imagination as to what happens next. Does Loki just decide to blow it off again, or does he find Dover, and then what happens to Dover after he finds him?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he pretty much is going to go to prison. That's for certain. If he doesn't die, that is. But what was great about that was about that ambiguous ending. And there was a video essay that I found that really perfectly summed it up. It was a great it was thematically fitting for like the two most central traits of Detective Loki and Keller Dover. Loki's like his Okay, so I would say it's his inability to just like let go of certain things. Like he's the guy that is going to constantly be pestering people, and he's hounding these details down and everything. He's not going to stop investigating once he's found a lead, right? And it's also been, I guess you could say it's his determination. That's his central character trait. And then with Keller Dover, it's a different kind of determination. It's his perseverance. It's a similar sort of character trait that allows him to like continue struggling and clinging on to life as he's blowing this whistle, right? So I think that when you're taking in these aspects of these characters that we see from the film, you can like pretty credibly back up like why it's so fitting, like why it's such a great ending for the film to go out on, and not necessarily answer what happens next, because that's not really important.
It's just the concepts that underpin that.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say that, you know, if you're going to make claims about like a certain character's actions, you know, like going back to Last Jedi or Last of Us Part 2, making a very certain stance clear about a character being right or wrong. I mean, I've seen so many people acting as though Poe was in the wrong. I say Poe did nothing wrong. Do you agree? From Last Jedi?
That Poe did nothing wrong?
Poe did nothing wrong.
Yeah?
Okay, good. Sorry, I thought that like we were about to spark up a debate. So yeah, like the movie treats Poe as if he did everything wrong. Every Last Jedi defender is arguing from that premise. It's a false premise. And we determine that it's false based on what we see happening in the film. And then you have Last of Us Part 2. They do the same thing. They say that Joel's in the wrong. He did nothing wrong. And so I have to...
Wait, hold on 1 second. What is the argument for Poe doing something wrong? That he decided to like take out the people who were trying to kill them?
Oh, you don't know that?
Well, no, like I get it, but I just
arguing against it.
Well, I know that people are arguing it against it, but I never got the argument, because like their whole reasoning for him doing something wrong is based on like this stupid perception that, you know, like you can't risk your own safety or the safety of your crew to take out a bigger threat. That bothers me.
I think it was because instead of just flying back to the Rata so that they could escape, he continued on with the attack on the Dreadnought. And so, but the problem with that is if he just follows Leia's orders and everyone gets on the Raddus, the Dreadnought follows them through hyperspace because they have hyperspace tracking, and it destroys the Raddus. So...
Isn't that his whole argument? Poe's like, we destroyed the Dreadnought, we're like safe now. We lost a few lives, but like the rest of the resistance is fine.
Well, they try to frame that as a bad thing. That it's better to. There are some problems that you can't resolve by getting into an X-wing and blowing it up, which is like, okay, yes, that's true, but in this particular instance, that was a problem that required getting into an X-wing and blowing something up.
In almost every other Star Wars movie, major problems have been solved by getting into an X-wing and blowing it up.
That's what's comical about it, and it literally did in that film. It's just like, what the hell, Leia? If you're gonna try to teach that lesson, have the lesson be applicable.
And what the number one argument I see for when it comes to Last of Us Part 2, for people arguing that Joel basically deserved what he got. And you've played Last of Us and Last of Us 2, have you?
I played the first one, but because of all the negative reception of the second one, I was just like, I don't know if I want to waste my time and have that emotional distraughtness.
Good man. Keep it that way. But so then you know how when they got to the hospital, the Firefly Hospital at the end, just quick question: was Ellie conscious or unconscious when they arrived at the hospital?
She was conscious?
No, she was unconscious.
I did not.
Yeah. So what happened was they're in the flooded tunnel, and circumstances lead to Ellie falling into water and nearly drowning, and Joel saves her narrowly, and he's providing CPR to her. A couple Fireflies are right out where they surface, and they approach Joel, and they strike him on the back of the head with a rifle and knock him out while he's trying to give her CPR. So already it's questionable. But then you skip over like past the level, right? We don't know for sure whether or not she like authorized this surgery that was going to kill her, but she wakes up. It's pretty clear that she didn't get to talk to any of the Fireflies. She confirms this in the last cutscene. She's like, I had so many questions for the Fireflies. You know, why did you take me away from them while I was still unconscious? Mm-hmm. So what we then have to, like the only conclusion that can be drawn from that then is that the Fireflies were going to operate on Ellie, take out her brain, kill her without consulting her first. Which takes it over from being a mere, like it's a sacrifice that Ellie is willing to make to the Fireflies don't care about whether or not it's a sacrifice Ellie is willing to make, and they're going to murder her.
Okay.
That's wrong.
Yeah.
And my position is I have a very firm stance against any aggressors. So if you're at a hospital and you have a loved one that's in the hospital and you're in the waiting room and the doctors are like, so we have like 5 other patients and their heart and their lungs and all their other organs, you know, they're failing and they're going to die, but your loved one happens to be a perfect match for all of them. So we're going to go ahead and harvest your loved one's organs and well, then they're going to be like, oh, you say no? Well, we're doing it anyways. Lol. So my position is you have literally every moral justification.
Shoot them.
To, yes, shoot every last person that tries to stop you from making your way to the operating room and saving your family member.
Right.
That's like I'm not saying you shoot indiscriminately, but everyone that tries to kill you as you are trying to stop them from murdering your family member, you are correct to kill them. Even if we were to then make it even more extreme, they say, hey, your family member has some special property of their brain that if we just take their brain out, we can cure coronavirus. You're like, yeah, no, we're not doing this. And it's like, even if that's guaranteed, because they're not consulting your family member first, they're not caring about your choice, they're not giving you a choice. And then there's the fact that so one more thought, when they're going to, right before Joel decides to rampage through the hospital, right?
Right, which that was such a good moment, honestly.
Right. Great moment. And right before he starts, do you remember what the Fireflies are going to do with him?
I don't, actually.
They're going to walk him out of the hospital, right? And so you think, okay, they're just sending him on his way. They've at least paid him the guns that they promised at the beginning of this mission, right? Nope. Oh, well, they're at least going to give him like his backpack full of supplies and guns and ammo and stuff that he'll need to survive the wilderness in this world, right? No, they were going to walk him right past his backpack without giving it to him, and they were going to just send him out of the hospital and basically exile him to death. So from that, like when you consider all of that evidence, right? You have people that are saying Joel didn't give Ellie a choice. Ellie wasn't given a choice. He didn't disrespect Ellie's choice. He disrespected the Firefly's choice.
For making that decision for her.
Exactly.
Killing her so they can make the vaccine, yeah.
Yeah. And so once we have all of those facts laid bare, did Joel do anything wrong?
No.
Precisely.
I don't think he did anything wrong.
But people that play the second game and they're like, yeah, Joel's a piece of shit. He doomed humanity. He got what he deserved. They don't remember that Ellie was unconscious. Like you, they don't remember that Ellie was unconscious. They don't remember the fact that she basically confirms that she never woke up after they arrived at the Fireflies hospital. And they also seem to forget the detail where they were just going to march him past his backpack and exile him. And the only reason why that doesn't happen is because Joel takes a few steps forward from his backpack, and that's when he starts the rampage.
Right.
So it's like, yeah.
So in Last of Us 2, where Joel dies, that whole scene, people are arguing that he deserved it.
Yes. Just Right, literally, Just Right, right?
Yes, I know Just Right.
Just Right literally said, every death that happens in the second game is because of Joel.
The only way that statement makes any sense is if as soon as the Fireflies had operated on Ellie, everyone in the world would instantaneously become immortal. I keep saying that, and people are like, you're being too hard on him. It's like, no, when you say literally every death that happens after the first game is Joel's fault, that means literally every death that happens after the first game is Joel's fault. And that makes no sense at all.
Do you remember the Amazing Spider-Man 1 when there's like a machine that shoots spores into the sky and they fall down and
everyone turns into a lizard?
Yes.
Yeah. And then Spider-Man puts in the thing that the anti-lizard thing. Okay, it's basically, the only way that this makes sense, that you can argue that Joel doomed humanity, is if the idea was they were going to take Ellie's little brain tisms and they were going to shoot it up into the sky, and it was going to create a million, billion, trillion different little spores that would fall onto the infected and turn them back into their regular selves. Because that shit's not working. That's not what they're planning on doing. And
dude,
it's like,
you know what I'm just thinking recently? Dude, we have COVID right now, and the world is working completely fine. Everything is going fine. Obviously, you got people who are overstaffed. Things aren't working fully. But if it's taking us this long to come up with a vaccine for COVID, how the hell were the Fireflies possibly going to make and then distribute a vaccine to the world? They weren't going to. It's
a vaccine for a
fungus,
by the way. A fungus, and fungal vaccines are not a thing. And even if they were to make... So this is also a more aggressive fungus than anything else in existence. This literally destroyed civilization.
Oh my gosh.
And
I don't know if they know how vaccines work. Anybody defending this is, it's all misconceptions.
Well, it gets better thought. So I replayed The Last of Us 2 because I'm a masochist and I need to get footage for my my review. And there's a scene in the game where Ellie is I think she's 17 at this point, and she well, first off, this is hilarious. So, do you know how far away Jackson, Wyoming, which is where they live, is in relation to Salt Lake City?
I actually live in Salt Lake City, so I have been there. Yeah, it's a few hours. Yeah.
Well, and they don't. She's not using a car. She's using a horse, so it's going to be more than a few hours at least. But
it's by horse, a week maybe.
And do you remember how dangerous it was to travel through the world in The Last of Us 1?
Yes, there was danger everywhere.
So I want you to imagine that Ellie, by herself, travels by horse from Jackson, Wyoming to Salt Lake City. She's sneaking out of Jackson. She doesn't tell Joel. And so she goes to Salt Lake City by herself. Apparently nothing noteworthy happened along the way there, or when she returned to Jackson with Joel. She finds a note. She finds several notes at this Firefly hospital. She goes to the Firefly hospital, okay? And one of the things that she finds is a note from the surgeon that's like, it's a drawing, it's an illustration of Ellie's brain, and they circled the exact part of the brain where the fungus was located. I'm gonna copy the image right here. It's the cerebellum. Now, Thought Theater. So this is the image. I want you to look at this. They've circled that part of the brain, and when you look up like the Gray's Anatomy of a brain, that's the cerebellum.
Yeah.
The cerebellum is the most common spot for brain tumors to form and be safely removed without killing the patient.
Okay.
Meaning that they didn't have to rip Ellie's brain out and rip it apart. They could have removed a sample of the fungus like it was a brain tumor, basically. And they wouldn't have had to kill her. So I want you to grasp this idea. And and the same cutscene, by the way, the same cutscene that shows her going through the hospital and everything. She finds a recording, and she's like, even if we did, it's from a Firefly, right? This is after the Joel's carnage. The Firefly is just in despair, and she's like, even if we did recover the kid, the last doctor in the world that could have developed a vaccine has been killed. So it's like, oh, so that guy was supposed to be the last hope of making a vaccine for a fungus, and he doesn't even know how to remove an abnormal growth from a cerebellum. Okay.
I can understand writing like something more complex but the fact is, if you have this character set up to be someone perfectly capable of just having a basic if we can understand this and he's supposed to be the expert in his field, there's no reason he shouldn't be able to. So, I mean, I don't think there's an excuse for that.
It took me literally 2 minutes to see the drawing, Google like the brain, understand what all the different components of the brain are, look up what the cerebellum is, like after recognizing, okay, that's the cerebellum, and then seeing, oh, how about cerebellar brain tumors? What about those? Can they be safely removed? They've been able to safely remove those things, since before the 20th century. The first recorded instance, I believe, is in 1894, give or take a couple years. So it's like, so this isn't even an operation that requires hyper advanced modern medical equipment that probably won't be accessible in this setting, right? No, they could have they should have the same exact tools as people in the late 19th century had, and yet they can't operate on a child's cerebellum without killing her. I just find that so interesting. And so if you have people like Just Right or Cosmonaut Variety Hour who ignore certain details about whether Ellie was conscious when they arrived at the hospital, who, ignore facts, like factual information about vaccines, like medical stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then they also ignore the fact that the Fireflies were basically going to murder Joel by exiling him without his weapons and stuff. It's like, it's pretty clear that when you have all that information factored in, that Joel did nothing wrong. But they don't cite that information. They intentionally leave that part out because they're buying into the narrative that the game is trying to sell you. And it's completely wrong. Like, I've never seen something as... I know this is going to sound hyperbolic, but I don't think I've ever seen anything as poorly written as The Last of Us Part 2.
So you would say that The Last of Us Part 2 fundamentally misunderstands its own stance on things from the first game and ignores all science in the second one that determines story elements?
Completely. It's mesmerizing, like how many gigantic holes you can punch into the very core of what that game's foundation, like the foundation that game's story is built upon, is so incredibly flimsy, right? And like in my script, like I have 13,000 words written just about the stuff with Joel, and I still have more to add to that section. But like towards the end, it's like, so already we're hemorrhaging with issues. The fundamental core of the story, it doesn't work. It's based on a false premise. And I could honestly end the video right there. I could just refuse to talk about anything else. And I could say my work here is done.
No, it sure sounds like you have a lot more to say.
Oh, I do. It's unfortunate. It's like this alone. It's like, it'd be one thing if the rest of the story was actually competently written, right? But it just had this rotten premise. No, it's far worse. And
so basically your recommendation is just go back and play the first one?
Yeah, go back and play the first one. You're actually not even missing out on much advancements in gameplay. The one thing I'd say is like the level design is better in the second one because it's got more depth to it in regards of like you're able to go prone, so you can like hide in tall grass, you can crawl under objects, you can crawl under cars and hide under them in certain sections, and you can like break glass. And then there's like a number of additions to the gameplay that are nice. But the core gameplay itself, the enemy AI is worse, significantly worse this time around.
I was watching a playthrough of it, and I noticed that almost instantly. I was like, really? This?
Yeah, there's stuff that Mahler has seen that I have seen that like would make a person's jaw drop because, and what's funny is that people were complaining that Mahler was only playing on hard, that he wasn't playing on the hardest difficulty. So I played on the hardest difficulty. I saw the same shit that Mahler saw. And so there's that aspect is worse. The shooting feels a lot worse. Evan, help me out here. Did the shooting feel better in the first game or the second?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I felt a lot better in the first game. Very unstable, like a lot of missed shots, especially headshots where you're supposed to land that perfect shot and you just miss inexplicably, and it's just like, what the hell? Yeah, it's not good.
You could have your sights perfectly lined up on a dude's head, and the dude could be standing still, right? Because I get moving target with like trying to aim for their head with a controller, not optimal. But yeah, I have had multiple instances where the person is completely still and I have my sights lined on them, but then the reticle just sways just enough to the left or the right at the last second because the sway is constant even when you are holding your breath to supposedly stabilize your aim, even when you have all the weapons stability upgraded. It's nightmarish. Whereas all you have to do in the first game is just spend supplements on upgrading the aim sway, and then the aim sway is non-existent.
Well, needless to say, I am looking forward to your critique. It sounds like it'll be quite the entertainment.
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, that's not even getting into the combat. The dodge button does not fucking work. It's insanely inconsistent, and it makes the melee fighting, which was supposed to be like one of those things where you don't like the shooting, so you go for the melee instead and preserve ammo. The melee becomes a chore. So it's just like, okay, enemy AI is worse, shooting is worse, melee combat is worse. Sure, I can throw bricks and balls through windows now. I can hide in tall grass now, but I can live without those things because the first game doesn't have those things. It's the downgrade in those other three features that are just like ugh, and then the story is like ugh.
Well, that's good to know. I will stay away from that. But I mean, I definitely feel like your analysis and just the general critique is maybe just a warning sign to people who want to write just stories in general on what to avoid.
Yeah, just have your story make sense. I would actually accept how they killed off Joel if the setup for it, if everything that built up towards it, that led up to it, made sense. Yeah. I've seen people say, no, Joel should have gone out in a blaze of glory. It's like, okay, yes, I would have preferred that. And yes, I would have preferred him not dying too. That also would have been fine.
But he's not a beloved character.
Oh, why?
I don't even want to get you started, dude.
Like, it's just for my critique, I'm willing to work within the confines of this is what Neil Druckmann wanted. Neil Druckmann wanted Joel to die 2 hours in. I'll do this. I will have him go out the exact same way where he gets bludgeoned and it's brutal and horrible and everything. But there's like a million things that we need to fix in regards to the setup. And it seriously is as simple as if the setup is not good, then it's going to completely deflate the payoff. Even if you can get the exact same payoff. I've had people try to argue, well, if you've said it yourself, you can just tweak a couple things and then the payoff is fine. So it's not actually bad writing. It's like, no, it's still bad writing. If the setup for it is not good, the payoff is not then earned, and then like that's going to affect the experience. Like I don't really know how else to put it. It's going to make it really hard to like buy into everything happening, because you may say like, okay, well, yeah, there is a good story in there where Joel dies horribly and you're getting revenge and everything. Yes, there is a good story in there somewhere, but it's not the one that we got. Still all has to fundamentally make sense. And if you're going to go this direction in your story where you're not going to give the audience what you want, if you're going to deliberately subvert their expectations and everything, it better make sense. It better make sense, or you're going to end up with a lot of pissed off people. Surely, like with Game of Thrones, maybe there was like a small number of people that were just pissed that Ned Stark died. But it seems like everyone reacted to it fairly well because it all made sense. So...
but Daenerys flipping out and going on a rampage made just as much sense.
Oh my god.
No, these are all great discussions to have for sure. Yeah, there's so much to be said. But anyways, just to kind of wrap up here, I want to hear from both Evan and you, Southpaw, if you could give one piece of advice to anybody who is either currently making video essays or wants to start, what would be just like the biggest point to hit on?
Be passionate. Honestly, like I think a lot of people give that point of advice, but I'm just like, if you don't care about the videos that you're making, people are not going to care. So you just got to find out what works for you. You got to find out like what type of video you want to make. If it's going to be video essays, if it's going to be vlogs, any type of content creation on YouTube, like your heart needs to be in it and you need to put in the work. And if you do those two things, I think you'll be golden. And you're not necessarily going to get a great audience at first, but you get better, you get more practice in, and eventually you're going to find something that you love. So just be passionate and work to improve your content constantly.
That's awesome. All right, Southpaw, what do you got for me?
In relation to like persuasion,
not just persuasion, but just like, if there's one principle that you want people to use or pay attention to as they're creating their content, what would it be?
Well, no, I was beginning with in relation to persuasion, like being persuasive, right? So your video essay needs to have a clear point and it needs to be argued well. And to argue it well, you have to factor in what certain counter arguments might be. If you have a certain conclusion that like it's controversial enough for you to make a video on it, right? You're not going to make a whole video essay about why apple pie is great and you love Mother, okay? Not the movie, your literal mother.
It is a good movie though.
Yeah, of course. And so what I'm trying to say here is you're starting out with a thesis and you're trying to support it with evidence. I think that it's important to understand there might be counter arguments against it and try to account for them. And to do that, again, just simply cite your facts. Okay, back it up with facts. There is no better way to convince people that you are correct than to show that the facts are on your side when it comes to your analysis of media.
That is great advice and something that I think even I can work on and hope to implement into my future videos. Southpaw and Evan Monroe, thank you so much for coming on the first episode of the Clapperboard podcast. It was really fun having you guys on.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. I'm honored to be one of your first guests.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, glad glad you invited me, dude. This is fun.
No, dude, it was. We got into some discussions I was not expecting, went longer than I was expecting, and I loved every second of it. I am excited to get this edited and out for you guys. All right, thank you so much, and we can cut there.